Starting at guard, a noun, a group acting together as a whole to achieve greatness. Collective. At forward, a noun, the game of skill, speed, and strategy played on the hardwood, and the conflict at the center of a galactic showdown between cartoons and aliens. Basketball! And anchoring the paint, a noun, a negotiated understanding between parties. From peace treaties to pick and rolls, human beings must reach them before turning ideas into reality. Agreements. And now, your host of the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast from Syracuse, New York, journalist, lawyer, business person, brother, son, and friend, Joe Manganiello.
Hello and welcome to the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. I'm your host, Joe Manganiello. We're moving into the Western Conference for the 2025 offseason previews. I've been doing these for several weeks now. If you missed my analysis on the Eastern Conference NBA teams, go ahead and look back on the feed over the last 3 Mondays. Before that, I took on free agency recaps of every WNBA team, and it's been a really exciting first couple months of the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. Thanks for all the support. Please share with friends, family, anybody that loves hoops, anybody that's intrigued by the business and the salary cap management aspects of the sport. We're going to get rolling here with, alphabetically speaking, the top team in the Western Conference. This is probably the franchise in the NBA in the hardest position of any franchise. And the wound, the source of that pain, was self-inflicted. We're talking about the Dallas Mavericks. The Luka Doncic trade, that wasn't it. Could have done a lot of things. That was not it. Not the right move. I don't want to belabor that point. There's plenty of platforms that have been eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner on that topic. I do want to spend a little bit of time because just a few days ago was the Luka return to Dallas game. And I do want to spend a little bit of time on that, talking about some of the business implications. There was reporting coming out of that event. But why don't we just start with the 24-25 record, 38-42 as of today's recording. Regular season is just about done. 10th in the Western Conference, so they could get into the play-in round. There is still some pivotal results over this final weekend of action, but for all intent and purposes, the Mavericks will not be a playoff threat this year. Would be shocked, really. Would be absolutely shocked if they made it out of the play-in round. And per cleaning the glass, instead of giving you a total season analysis, how I've been doing for other teams, offensive rating, defensive rating, etc., I actually want to just pinpoint the last 2 weeks, because I think these numbers, as terrible as they are, tell the real story. Over the last 2 weeks, the Mavericks are 27th in the NBA in point differential with a minus 14.8. Every 100 possessions, they're getting beat by 15 points. That's how the last 2 weeks have gone. 27th in offense, 27th in defense, and these numbers are hideous. Absolutely hideous. You know, the Utah Jazz, the Washington Wizards, these are the only teams that are playing worse than the Mavericks right now. And anybody who's been following this regular season, particularly coming off of the Luka trade, knows that the Mavericks had a slew of injuries at the absolute wrong time. Of course, they traded Luka Doncic when he was injured, but he was set to return, which I think was a large component of the timing of the trade, was the Lakers were waiting for when Luka was going to be able to return to action coming off that calf injury. So they trade Luka to the Lakers. They get Anthony Davis. He gets hurt in his first game. Kyrie Irving tears an ACL days later. The Mavericks have been injured in their front court really since the turn of the calendar year. Gafford, Lively, PJ Washington's missed time. And so here we are. We have a team that we thought, even if they didn't return to the finals in 2025, they lost to the Celtics in 2024. We had a team where the offseason would have been really straightforward. You extend the $345 million 5-year contract extension to Luka Doncic as a designated player. You re-sign Kyrie Irving, his star counterpart, to a compromise somewhere between his max salary over a long-term deal and, something competitive, something to keep him from opting out of his player option and hitting free agency. Is kind of ironic that the team with the most cap space in 2025 is the Brooklyn Nets, but nonetheless, I'm sure Kyrie and his representation have done due diligence. There are teams that would want Kyrie Irving, and so you sign Luka, you sign Kyrie, you keep this core rotation together, and you go full hog after a title in 2026 and beyond. But the key, Luka's in his mid-20s. You're competing for titles now. You're competing for titles 5 years from now. You're maybe even competing for titles 10 years from now. Looking at teams like the Lakers and the Warriors now, LeBron, Curry are aging up every year, and yet they're still competing. And when you have a superstar like Luka Doncic as a business, there's no better advantage. You have a player that your fans adore, love, feel confident. Hey, if we have him, we can win against anybody. And year after year after year. I mean, in the NFL, the only position where this really applies is quarterback, because it's hard to project that a football player will be healthy and in their prime for any more than 5, 6, 7 years. Quarterbacks now, there is some expectation that they can be at a Pro Bowl level into their late 30s. Baseball, you can't really rely on pitchers that way. Maybe, if you have a power hitting first baseman or outfielder or somebody that you feel like, all right, they're going to be in the lineup for the next 15 years. And in baseball, you see contracts like that. You see 10, 12, 15-year contracts for the right guy. Hockey, they're permitted to do long-term contracts. And so you'll see that, this would be like if the Capitals traded Ovechkin, if the Penguins traded Crosby, if it's the Oilers have Connor McDavid. This is what happened. This is what happened this year in the NBA. The Mavs are going to feel the pain. Their fans are going to feel the pain. Financial fundamentals for the Dallas Mavericks: 10 contracts under team control this summer, 0 restricted free agents, 2 player options, most notably Kyrie Irving, and we're going to talk about him in a second. 2 veteran cap holds. The Kyrie Irving contract situation is going to dominate this offseason, for better or worse, for the Mavericks. So presently, the Mavs do have some cap space, but it's not sufficient to build around. And so my guess is that they will start their offseason with taking care of Kyrie and then operate over the cap so that they can use some exceptions and do what they can to fill out a roster while staying below the aprons. But again, until they sign Kyrie, they're well below the tax right now, but until they sign Kyrie, we just don't know. And they do have their own 2025 first-round pick, which continues to grow in value for all of the wrong reasons, but that will be helpful to them to add a young player somewhere in the late teens, early 20s. Why don't we start here? I mentioned before that I'm recording this on April 11th, so it was only a few days ago when Luka returned to Dallas. And per ESPN reporting, quote, Nico Harrison ultimately convinced Mavericks governor Patrick Dumont, the front man for the family that bought the majority share of the franchise from Mark Cuban, that signing Doncic to a 5-year, $345 million Supermax extension this summer would be a poor investment. Well, unfortunately for Nico Harrison, there were other ways to analyze the quality of investment and the quality of their decision-making, because per sources that spoke to ESPN, this decision probably cost the franchise 9 figures over the next several years. The Mavs are projected to lose dozens of millions of dollars in revenue relative to ticket sales and attendance, plummeting merchandise sales, right? Luka Doncic was the number one jersey for the Dallas Mavericks. Now you can't sell that jersey. Now you have kids and families that spent a lot of money on that jersey, and now they're learning the wrong lesson as consumers. We're not going to buy a Mavericks jersey again. I spent $100 so my kid could wear a number 77 with Doncic on the back, and then you went ahead and traded him. So I'm not going to spend that money on a Mavericks jersey. Maybe we'll go to a game, but guess what game we're going to try to go to? We're going to try to go to one of the games where Luka comes back to town as a Laker. But then let's add insult to injury. The Mavericks have also recently announced that season tickets are going up in price, which is commonplace. But you know what isn't commonplace is trading your franchise superstar, artificially shrinking your contention window and alienating all of your fan base. Ticket prices are going to go up 8.6%. And the Mavericks said through a press release that increase is due to, quote, ongoing investments in the team and fan engagement, end quote. So pretty sour taste in everyone's mouth there. Apparently, many fans have canceled their season tickets and did so in the immediate aftermath of the trade. And the Mavericks even attempted to generate some goodwill by offering limited refunds. And just as an aside, I worked in the corporate sales department for the New York Liberty for 3 years. That is not how you run a ticketing business. You don't offer refunds for season tickets. You have folks sign a contract. It's for a certain amount of time, a certain term. There's a window that you are contractually obligated to give to the member so that if they opt out, they're returning that asset to the team. And the team can then put that asset back on the market at a new price. And these contracts, the way they're written, the team is also allowed to raise the price. They would never drop the price if they don't have to, but they're permitted to change the price while the asset belongs to the member. But this is a very delicate give and take. It's a very public-facing aspect of the business. Not to mention that when you have a camera in the Mavericks arena and you see more and more empty seats, you see more and more people saying or displaying signs to fire the general manager, saying that they're displeased with the team. There have been public protests. I mean, this situation gets uglier and uglier by the week. I don't think that this is going to change after one offseason. I have a feeling that the Mavericks are going to be feeling this pain all of next year, particularly as Kyrie Irving is out with an ACL injury. So unless Anthony Davis has an MVP run and the Mavs are able to really get back into the mix in some meaningful way, I just don't even know how you distract the fans in the short term, because all of this pain is due to the long term, the next 8, 10, 12 years that you're going to miss Luka. I just don't see this getting better anytime soon. There were also sources that told ESPN that the Mavs, they had lined up lucrative sponsorship deals for Wednesday's game, and that was actually in partnership with multiple companies that Doncic endorses. But those deals fell apart because Doncic's camp did not give their blessing. In other words, the final yes had to go through Doncic and his representation. And they said, you know what? We actually don't want the Mavericks to get any goodwill, or, we actually don't want the Mavericks to get any money from this opportunity. And so if you saw, they did produce a shirt to go along with the sign-off video or the thank you video for Luka, and it had a single word in Slovenian, thank you, for their former Slovenian star, which, I'm not going to kill them for that. I think in some ways it was a creative way to thread the needle. They wanted to do something, and the lucrative sponsorship deals that they had secured in advance, those fell through, so they had to do something. And I think there's actually it's kind of touching to do that, thank you in Slovenian, but it's embarrassing. I mean, the whole thing is embarrassing. The Mavericks say that despite the price adjustments, full season ticket holders will continue to save 15 to 23% by buying their tickets through the package as opposed to projected secondary market prices. I can tell you, as someone that sold these packages for a living, that is one of the key talking points that we are trained to offer is, hey, like, if you love going to games, this is your best way to save money because you would have to pay more money per game on the secondary market. You know what most people will say back? Unless they're really, really interested. Yeah, that's fine. I'm going to go to less games. I'll pay more for the game I want to go to than the 10 games that I don't. And I see it from both sides. I tried my best to persuade as many people to join the Liberty as season ticket holders because I really believed that we had a lot of value to offer. There were other perks, including exclusive membership events and things like that. But from the Mavericks side of things, these fans don't want to go support the Mavericks, and they don't want to go to Mavericks events. I think this is going to be a really, really big problem for them. Season ticket cost for club access level has gone up 10%, and even some terrace level seating is going up to $20 or $25 per game. And so the Mavericks, they did throw out one other note that 4,200 seats per game are still available below $40. I can guarantee that those seats are in the upper deck, and the upper deck experience at an NBA game is as good as the interest of the fan. Period. No one wants to sit in the upper deck if they don't have to. But you go if that's the price point that you can afford and you want to be a part of this larger crowd experience. Well, if people don't want to support the Mavericks the way that they used to, no one's going to want to go sit up in those upper deck. And, I'll say this, and I'll sort of keep it short, but for the Brooklyn Nets games that I worked or, sort of was around for at a time where the franchise was in a really low place, we had a lot, the Barclays Center, I think, sold a lot of tickets through international tourism and travel. And so we would have a lot of folks from Europe or South America in the building, and that's a beautiful thing. Basketball's a global game. But these weren't die-hard Brooklyn Nets fans. And I think that's where the Mavericks are heading, and I don't think that Dallas is the tourism attraction that Brooklyn and New York City is. So, we'll see how bad this gets. We'll see how bad this gets. And so the Kyrie Irving question, will he opt in to his player option, rehab for a full year, on a salary just shy of $44 million, $43.96? Or will this be the appropriate timing for both team and player to come to agreement on a long-term deal? Now, that would have been definitely the decision if Kyrie didn't get hurt. With Kai getting hurt and the Mavericks poised for a very, very challenging year, I suspect that there will have to be some sort of compromise, some sort of negotiated win-win. And I'm going to cite a couple of veterans, Draymond Green, Rudy Gobert. We're also going to talk about Aaron Gordon for the Denver Nuggets later in this episode. These are recent examples of veterans who were able to negotiate player options into their deal. But then when it came time to restructure or renegotiate a contract extension, that player option, it was a tool for the player to say, hey, I can opt into this or opt out of this, depending on how advantageous the terms we can agree to are on the larger deal. And so just to make this clear, Kyrie could become a free agent this offseason. He could opt out of that $44 million. So he could say, I'm not going to take the 1 year of 44. I'm going to hit the market and try to find a long-term deal, unless, Dallas, you can make an offer that works for me. The fact that he's injured, you would think that hurts his leverage, but because of how ugly things have gotten for the Mavs, I think they need this press release. I think they need to be able to say, hey, Kyrie Irving, Hall of Famer, champion, is going to be on the Mavericks long term. You just have to wait for him to get healthy. And so what I would guess is that we're going to see him decline that option. And if you're Kyrie's representation, this is how the conversation starts. We would love to discuss Kyrie's maximum extension terms, which would be a 5-year deal because he's opting out. And so as a free agent, the team looking to retain their player can extend a 5-year offer, whereas another team can only offer 4. So that's an advantage for the team. So it'd be a 5-year structure. And $313 million is the maximum amount of money that Kyrie could receive based on his first year maximum salary. So this is how you figure this out. His first year maximum salary would be $54.12 million. I'm gonna round to the 10th, 54.1. And then he is entitled to 8% raises based on the first year. So if you were trying to do this math at home, you wouldn't want to calculate an 8% raise year over year. And sometimes I slip up and say it that way, but the key is that it's relative to the base year, relative to the first year. So 54.1, 8% up. Year 2 is 58.5. 8% up in year 3, 62.8. Fourth year, $67.1 million. Whoo, baby. And year 5, this is in the 2030 season. So we're ending the 2020s. Everything's fine in America and the world, ... And Kyrie Irving could have a fifth year valued at $71.4 million. So the player goes, why don't we talk about that? Why don't we talk about how you can pay me just shy of $314 million? Now, Dallas had cold feet and ultimately made a strange, controversial, terrible decision to trade Luka Doncic because they didn't want to offer him $345 million over 5 years. And if some of y'all were curious how that worked, why Luka was entitled to more, they're actually both built around the 35% maximum salary. Luka, because he is an all NBA designated player, he's unlocked criteria. Kyrie, because he has been in the NBA for more than 10 years, he's entitled to a 35% max if he can negotiate it. And so for Luka, he has a player option in the 26-27 season. And so when you hear people talk about Dallas didn't want to offer him $345, that's because Luka would have been opting out of the 26-27 season. And the first year of that extension would actually be the maximum salary for 26, which is more than the maximum salary in 25. And so that's just a simplified way. That's why Luka's 5-year deal, because it started a year after, and the first year salary would actually be higher than, because the maximum is based on the salary cap, and the salary cap is going up 10% every year. So anyway, we're getting a little far afield here. So Kyrie can get up to $314 million. Do I think that Kyrie Irving, after tearing his ACL, is going to get a 5-year, $314 million deal? I do not. I do not think that he will be able to negotiate that. I do think, however, there is a middle ground where Dallas is better served to make a large extension offer to him and then negotiate certain guardrails or certain team-friendly protections that make it worth their while. So, for example, what the team is going to say is, well, we're looking to avoid the first apron. Kyrie, as you know, the CBA is very punitive to teams that spend above the tax line. We are only $42 million below the first apron as things stand right now. And so, we could try to trade some other guys and open up salary that way. But of course, Kyrie, you want to play with good teammates, and we have good players on the roster. We don't want to trade them away. So can we keep your first year salary below $42 million so that we can sign you? We know that we're under the first apron, and then everything else we do for the rest of the offseason as we hit the 25-26 season will be in the effort to keep our team friendly with that first apron line. Now, as the player, you don't want to hear that. As the player, you don't want to hear, we can't pay you what you want because we're trying to be frugal. You just don't want to hear that. And in the NBA, it's still a soft salary cap, so teams can still go above these lines if they are so inclined. And so the negotiation could get pretty rough. I mean, to break down what those numbers look like, if you started Kyrie Irving at $40 million, which is somewhat arbitrary, but it is a round number. If the year one salary was $40 million, year two would be 43.2, year three would be 46.4, year four would be 49.6, year five would be $52.8 million. I mean, that's not bad. That's nothing to sneeze at. It's a ton of money for a player coming off an ACL injury who's already in his mid-30s, but the guaranteed value is only $232 million there. Suddenly, we're $80 million apart. Kyrie's max is let's say 314. It's 314. Dallas is going to probably come in much lower. Hey, we want to stay under the first apron. Here's $232 million. Now, one thing that is definitely going to come up is you can structure these contracts with unlikely bonuses, and they don't immediately count against the salary cap. Now, they do count against the apron. Again, very punitive system here. And so there might be some wiggle room where Kyrie could take less in salary if they can negotiate unlikely bonuses. For those curious, an unlikely bonus is, hey, the player's never done this before, or the player has not done this in his most immediate season. So if we put it into the contract, in a year where they then do that statistical accomplishment, or they win that award, they unlock more money. But of course, that money would then count against the cap. And then to double down on this, unlikely bonuses have to count against the apron because of the hard cap implication. So you have this tool that in theory could be good for both player and the team, but in the apron environment, it's actually not as advantageous as it used to be. But just to flesh this out, if Kyrie's first year salary was $40 million, unlikely bonuses can be up to 15% of the first year salary. So you could write the contract with about $6 million in annual unlikely bonuses, and then that could get the total contract value to Kyrie up to $256 million. There's also a trade bonus that you could put in if, for whatever reason, Kyrie got traded. That could get him more money. But I think this gap between 230, 240, 250 million and the full 314, it's fascinating. It's going to be a fascinating negotiation. Maybe we would see some non-guarantees or some injury language. Hey, like if he re-injures the same knee, then, the Mavericks can wipe out certain, certain salary wouldn't count against the cap, those types of non-guarantees. But I'm going to wrap up the Dallas section there because until we know what Kyrie's next contract is, there's really no way to know what the next steps in this franchise are. And in the meantime, they had stepped in mud. They saw the mud and they stepped in it, and now they're sinking in it because it's actually not mud, it's quicksand. And I think that they're going to have to give Kyrie a humongous payday. And they're going to have to buy some time for their franchise, give the fans something to think about. Hey, maybe someday Kyrie Irving and Anthony Davis will be on the court at the same time and we'll be a pretty good team. Maybe not as great as we used to be, but we'll be pretty good. It's not a great place to be in if you're the Dallas Mavericks, but that is exactly where they find themselves. And speaking of teams not in great positions and questioning where they find themselves, the Denver Nuggets. Welcome back. Talking Denver Nuggets basketball. So something pretty strange happened the other day, recording in mid-April. Denver Nuggets became one of the only NBA franchises in the history of the league, despite having a winning record and being poised to make the playoffs, to fire their head coach, as well as their general manager, days before the playoff starts. This is a borderline unprecedented situation. And by all accounts, this was a double firing that everybody from inside the organization and outside the organization saw coming. And yet it was still so shocking. Head coach Michael Malone oversaw a championship in 2023, one of the longest tenured coaches in the NBA. This is a very offensive, unsanctimonious firing. for a coach that had accomplished so much. And, along those lines, the fact that things had gotten so toxic on the inside to where reportedly staffers for the Nuggets were considered either Malone people or Calvin Booth people. The GM, the former GM, Calvin Booth. Booth or Malone. That's no way to work. That's no way to build a culture. And so even though the Nuggets have the greatest player in the league, Nikola Jokic, even though their championship run was less than 2 years ago, and even though the team, as things stand, 48-32, fourth in the Western Conference, a very, very good chance of being in the top 6 playoff seeds. Maybe they fall into the play-in. Denver did lose 10 out of 16 games, including 4 straight before the firings. So they are a team that have been dipping as of late. But with Nikola Jokic on board, you have to like your chances of winning any particular playoff series. And yet here they are. Per Cleaning the Glass, as of April 11th, expected to get to about 50 wins. 50 wins is a sub-title contender. Typically, title contending teams are winning 55, 60 games or more. And it wasn't the offensive fault. This year, offensive rating of a 120.8 is 4th in the NBA. Shout out to Nikola Jokic, who I haven't looked recently, but with Jokic on the floor, the Nuggets score about 125 per 100 possessions, which is like an all-time rate. The issue has been defense, by and large. A 116.7 defensive rating is only 22nd in the NBA. And so the Nuggets for the year, their net rating plus 4.1. It's good. It's not great. 9th in the NBA. So they're not killing teams. They're not putting away lower competition. They're sort of suffering through being an incomplete roster, being stuck between 2 timelines, which I'm going to talk a bit more about here, because there was a power struggle between the coaching staff through Michael Malone that wanted to lean on the veterans and play guys who could win today versus this front office led by Calvin Booth that said, hey, we're drafting young guys. They need to be developed. These young guys are on cheaper contracts. And if we can get them to play at a higher level faster, it's a great financial benefit to us because they're going to just cost us less than the veteran guy that Michael Malone wants to play. And so as we look at their financial fundamentals for next year, and of course, way different decision makers are going to be involved. The Nuggets are going to have a mess to clean up because they have this identity crisis between their coaching staff and their front office. And you have a roster that really feels that way, a roster that doesn't make a lot of sense and has holes and is messy. 12 contracts under team control, no RFA candidates, 2 player options, and 2 cap holds on the book. So we'll talk more about some of those specifics. They do not have cap space. They are negative $41.4 million in all likelihood in cap space, which means they're only $8.5 million outside of the second apron if they filled out their roster to 14 via minimums. This is a tough dance to pull off where they have to fill out their roster. They don't want to go over the second apron. They're a franchise that typically would avoid the tax anyway. I do want to point out that Denver did pay the tax this year. It's going to be about a $20.4 million tax payment, which isn't nothing, but they typically don't pay the tax. I would venture a guess that if the Nuggets disappoint in the playoffs, which they appear poised to disappoint, they just fired their coach and their GM, that they might make some drastic choices to get out of the tax altogether, because based on Dunked on Prime's cap sheet, if they stay in the tax and go into the repeater, they might have to make a repeater tax penalty of about $25 million next year. And who knows, that could balloon up depending on who else they add and what other moves they make. And this ownership group is pretty wealthy. They also own the LA Rams in the NFL. But traditionally, they do not spend that type of money on their Nuggets franchise. And if they're not competing directly for championships, I find it very hard to believe that they will pay those types of luxury tax penalties. So let's start here. Nikola Jokic, one of the higher paid players in the sport, but it makes all the sense in the world. Jamal Murray is starting a new max extension. His salary jumps up from $36 to $46.4 million next year. Michael Porter Jr. continues to make near max salary. We're going to talk about Aaron Gordon a bunch. I think Dario Saric is very likely to opt into his player option, considering that he fell out of the rotation almost immediately. And notably, Dario Saric was someone that they signed using the taxpayer mid-level exception. So that salary was $5.2 million last year, and they signed into a 1+1 deal. So this player option in the second year, the salary rises to $5.4 million. It's not a ton of money, but Saric wasn't helping them at all this year. So unfortunately, he's going to probably opt into that. The other player option they have in the books is Russell Westbrook, and we're going to talk a little bit more about him in a second. And then really everybody else on the roster are guys who they drafted, and so they're younger in their careers. They're not making a ton of money, but they're also not super duper productive guys. The best player in that bunch, of course, is Christian Braun, who really did show a lot this year on a $3 million salary. He's only making 4.9 next year. And whoever the new GM of the team is going to have to consider giving him a rookie scale extension in October, which I think it's going to fall outside the scope of this conversation today. I don't want to exactly project what that rookie scale extension might look like. We don't really even know what the Nuggets are going to look like. But let's do some housekeeping here and just make sure I report a little bit more on the firings. The feud between Michael Malone and Calvin Booth was so intense. Sources said to Matt Moore of the Denver Dig that people within the Nuggets were labeled either a Malone person or a Booth person. Problems were intensifying in recent weeks, which, there were stories for over a year, multiple years about the nature of this toxicity, but things have gotten worse as the team has been playing worse. Yahoo Sports had some reporting on that. One big issue was that Calvin Booth was really bothered by the fact that Michael Malone was playing Russell Westbrook over Jalen Pickett. So Jalen Pickett is a low first-round pick that Booth made. He really likes Pickett as a guard. And this would have been the year to really see more from Pickett, see what he has. And instead, the Nuggets signed former MVP and veteran Russell Westbrook to a minimum. It was a 1+1, so Westbrook would have the option to come back on his own terms next year to the Nuggets. Or if he hated it in Denver, he could just walk away. And in general, again, veteran player, someone who isn't homegrown, wasn't a draft pick of the Nuggets. And this was something that was infuriating for Calvin Booth. Why aren't you playing my guy? I drafted this guard. He never plays. I, Joe Manganiello, host of the CBA podcast, I barely know who Jalen Pickett is. I barely know who he is. And yet Michael Malone is playing this veteran Russell Westbrook, who's an imperfect player. Brings some good things to the table, brings some bad things to the table. You know what happened the other day is in crunch time of a very important regular season game, Russell Westbrook missed a layup. Had a wide open layup, missed it. And apparently that really set things off behind the scenes because from the GM's point of view, it's like you're playing a guy who can't even make a layup in crunch time. And I want you to play the rookie that I drafted. Here's another issue. The Nuggets signed big man Zeke Naji to a 4-year, $32 million extension. That wasn't really based on production. It was more based on the idea that Booth drafted Naji, saw something in him. And on a team with Jokic, you don't need a center to start. You just need a backup. And so it's like, we want Naji to be the backup. Let's sign him to an $8 million a year salary, 4 for 32. That's a bargain, an absolute bargain in today's salary cap environment. And if we can develop him and we have a cheap backup center, that's an asset. That is an asset in today's salary cap environment. And Michael Malone couldn't give a hoot. According to reporting from Adam Maris of DNVR, Michael Malone would deliberately not play Naji. Deliberately not play him. Aaron Gordon usually would back up Jokic at center, even though Aaron Gordon's also the starting power forward, because he wanted to make Calvin Booth look bad. I mean, that reporting is pretty damning. And so Then you get into, what does ownership think? So reportedly, the Athletic reported that executive Josh Kroenke, from ownership, merely signed Calvin Booth to an extension as the general manager. And there's not public reporting on GM contracts. I wish there were. But he almost gave Booth the extension and then pulled it based on the idea that, you know what? I actually just don't really believe that we have everything we need. And because things had gotten so toxic between the coaching staff and the GM, and Michael Malone doesn't have a new contract as the coach. There were concerns that he was going to leave on his own accord this offseason and resign. And so no new contract for Malone, no new contract for Booth. And then I also want to point out, and Dan Feldman of Dunked On wrote about this in his newsletter, but Denver is historically cheap with their general managers. The Nuggets had Tim Connolly, who did a great job, including drafting Jokic, but watched Connolly go to the Minnesota Timberwolves for a bigger salary. Before Connolly, the Denver Nuggets had Masai Ujiri, one of the biggest names in NBA front offices, and he left for the Toronto Raptors for more money and more power. So it's really hard to know what is going to happen here. Kroenke himself is going to actually take over the front office in the interim. My guess is that he will eventually hire a new president, somebody that he respects, and somebody who will then take over the coaching search. It would be pretty idiotic to go through this very embarrassing slate of firings and then walk into a similar dynamic where the GM and the coach don't see the eye to eye. The best way to avoid that, I don't know if Kroenke considered this, the best way would actually be to hire the GM or the president first and have them hire the coach and create a line of succession, a hierarchy. I think Michael Malone winning a championship as coach and everything that he had gone through at, Sacramento before he came to Denver, Michael Malone has a certain type of personality. I don't think Calvin Booth was ever going to be able to walk into a room and tell Michael Malone what to do. But that is a problem. It is a problem if the franchise is consistently drafting players and then they don't play. And I'm sympathetic to that concern, even if I think I more so see things from Michael Malone's perspective. You won a championship in 2023. You have Nikola Jokic in his prime. You gotta squeeze every drop of lemonade out of that lemon you can while you have Jokic in his prime. And the fact that this front office and this ownership group was more concerned with avoiding tax payments in recent years, maybe not this past year, but in recent years, this is how things spoil. This is how things go bad. So we'll see exactly what happens in Denver moving forward. Last episode I talked about how Milwaukee is likely going to shop Giannis Antetokounmpo as well as Damian Lillard this summer. Wouldn't shock me if Denver shopped Jokic, especially if Denver got bounced in an ugly fashion from round one. I don't know if anybody has a big enough trade package to secure Jokic, but this will be an interesting summer where, Kevin Durant and maybe even Devin Booker are available. Players on the Boston Celtics are going to be available for contractual reasons. Maybe Giannis, maybe Lillard. And if you threw Jokic into that mix, we might see some of the biggest fireworks on the trade market we've ever seen in the month of July and August. So I want to wrap up this episode talking a little bit about Aaron Gordon, because earlier this season, a very interesting decision was made where Aaron Gordon agreed to a 4-year, $133 million contract extension with Denver. But that included him opting into his $23 million salary for 2025-26. So earlier when I was talking about Kyrie, I actually don't think I fully fleshed this out. So Kyrie has the player option for $44 million. He could opt out of it and take a starting salary, a first-year salary that's less than that. But the goal would be to have a total contract extension that guarantees money in the long term. So if you're the player, you take a short pay cut in the first year and you build out a larger contract. We've seen Draymond Green do that in recent years. Chris Middleton actually did that with the Bucks, and then funny enough, he had to get traded to the Wizards because he wasn't earning his $31 million salary, and the Bucks are going through some changes. But Gobert did this, Draymond did this, and Aaron Gordon opted into his $23 million salary for the 25-26 season. And you could argue that Aaron Gordon in the short term is more than a $23 million player. Certainly, if I'm representing Aaron Gordon, that's what I'm saying is, no, I want to opt out. I want to opt out and sign a new deal. Make it worth my while. Make it worth it for my client to opt into $23 million. And so what they did was he opted into $23 million and then extended into the future from there for an additional 3 years. And so the final contract actually has a player option on the 4th year. So in the 28-29 season, Gordon could opt out and then sign a new deal. There's also a trade kicker. So Gordon would receive bonus money if the Nuggets traded him. And notably, this deal was only made possible because under the new CBA, the NBA allows veteran contract extensions to be built around a first-year salary increase of 140%. I like to call it the 140% rule. It used to only be 120%. And so Gordon would not have been able to guarantee himself $133 million. I want to say it would have been closer to about $111 million or $112 million. And so he would have left about $20 million on the table. I think because of the more advantageous contract extension rules, you saw a situation where the Nuggets could present something to Aaron Gordon and say, hey, this is the most money we can pay you, right? If you opt into $23 million, we can bump up your salary in the 26-27 season by 140%. And so that looks like $31.978 million, or just about 32. So he goes from about 23 to about 32 million, but that number would have been much less than 32 million if he was only allowed to extend with 120% salary increase. Now it's 140. And so, he'll be at 34.5 million the following year. And again, that player option in year 4, a $37 million deal. Now, he probably, and at that point, he's in his mid-30s. He's probably thinking more consciously about how many contracts do I have left in the league. My guess is that around that time, he's probably not going to be worth $37 million a year. And so it might make sense for him to opt out of that and sign a new deal where he doesn't make 37, but maybe it drops back down to 31, 32, but then he is able to guarantee himself 2 or 3 more years on the back end, and then he really rides out the rest of his career on that contract. These rules and this regime empower players to think about, how many contracts do I want to get between now and my retirement, and how can I maximize not just year by year, but how can I enter the marketplace at the most advantageous times? And so I thought that was a really fascinating deal. I think it's very likely that Denver will regret guaranteeing that much money to Gordon on the back end of that deal. But also, Nikola Jokic is only guaranteed on the roster for next year and the following year. And so these 2 seasons that for a fact that you have Jokic, they have made sure that Murray is signed, Porter Jr. is signed. Now they've made sure that Aaron Gordon is signed. You obviously have big issues on the bench and question marks about how many of these young guys do we actually want to keep around. Is there a way for us to go out and get another starting caliber player that is a better fit? Can we trade Michael Porter Jr. for a package of players? This offseason is full of questions, and now we don't know who's going to be making those decisions other than Kroenke, as the owner. So fascinating to see. From here, we're going to go to a different team in the West, a different contender in the West, with a different Hall of Fame player as their tentpole. We're going to go to the Golden State Warriors, a team with a lot of good vibes right now. Next up, we're talking about a team that's won 15 of their last 20. A team that I believe has a great chance, not a good chance, a great chance to win a historic championship. We're talking about the Golden State Warriors. We're talking about head coach Steve Kerr. We're talking about greatest shooter of all time, greatest player of all time, Steph Curry. And we're talking about Jimmy Butler, and we're talking about Draymond Green, and we're talking about the Chase Center, and we're talking about a franchise that really should be the envy of the entire NBA. I mean, I've never lived in the Bay. I go to the Bay from time to time. My partner works for a firm based out there. Shout out to the Golden State Valkyries, about to debut for the WNBA. In a year where you had many franchises alienate their fans, embarrass themselves in the standings, and create massive amounts of doubt for their future, Golden State did all of the opposite things. They have a lot to be excited about. And there still are some questions. You know, to be clear, since 2020, Golden State has made some questionable choices. I think the James Wiseman draft pick, number 2 in 2020, is one of the more disastrous choices the franchise has made in the last half decade. I think Jonathan Kuminga, who we're going to talk about in a minute, drafting Kuminga over Franz Wagner was just a flat-out mistake. A huge miss. But you can't go backward. You got to keep moving forward. And to Golden State's credit, at a time where, yeah, there is a pretty super team in the West, Oklahoma City, nearly winning 70 games. And in the East, you have 2 teams that have been dominant all season, including the defending champ Boston Celtics. But other than that top 3, and notwithstanding the fact that the Lakers suddenly have LeBron James and Luka Doncic on the same team, and there are a few other teams playing good basketball. But to me, Golden State is in that conversation for scariest playoff opponent and most well-rounded team in a season where, from a competition standpoint, I think the NBA is just in a really healthy place. There's enough parity, but you also have some super teams at the top of the standings. And Golden State is somewhere in the middle where, after the All-Star break, there have only been a couple teams on their level. Let's just rattle through their fundamentals here. So, for record 47-33, currently 6th in the West. We'll see if they can avoid the play-in round. Although I wouldn't be, if they got the 7th seed, that means they're hosting the 7-8 matchup in the play-in round. I would predict them to absolutely dominate that game. Absolutely dominate. And it could be against Memphis, which would be really fun because there are some animosities between Golden State and Memphis, and I think Golden State would trounce them, particularly coming off of Memphis firing their own head coach, Taylor Jenkins. Denver stole the headline on that one. Memphis fired their head coach. Denver says, you know what? We could do you one better. So Golden State on the year, their expected wins per 82 games is 48. So, they're right around where the advanced metrics would predict them. That's based on a 17th overall offensive rating, which is disappointing. 114.9, but trending in the right direction. 7th in defensive rating, a 112.2. That's a net rating of plus 2.7, 10th in the NBA. So for the season, they've been a top 10 team by the advanced metrics. Over the last 2 weeks, that has gotten better. They're actually 4th in the NBA over the last 2 weeks, a plus 13 net rating, and they're 6th in offense and defense. So that's what I'm saying. I think right now, the only teams that can say that they are playing better than Golden State are OKC. I think Boston, even though they're kind of sleepwalking through the end of the regular season, I would say they still have a team that absolutely can win the whole thing. Cleveland has been struggling relative to Golden State over the last 2, 3, 4 weeks. Houston's playing great, but I don't believe in them the way that I believe in Golden State, but we're going to talk more about Houston at the end of the show. How did Golden State get here? Well, they traded for a guy named Jimmy Butler, and that has worked out very well. But before we go too quickly there, their financial fundamentals, 9 contracts under team control. Kuminga is their one restricted free agent. They don't have any player options in this summer, and they have 2 veteran cap holds. Golden State is extended in terms of their costs. They're about $40 million over the salary cap. They're only $7.4 million from the second apron if they fill out their roster with minimums to 14 players. So, and no draft picks for next year. So in some ways, it's like a high risk, high reward situation. And so far, it's looking like the reward part, because this is kind of the team that they have now. This is kind of the team that they have for the end of the Steph Curry era. They gave Jimmy Butler a huge extension upon trading for him. $54.1 million next year, $56.8 million in the 26-27 season. They have Draymond Green under contract. They have Buddy Hield for 1 more year, and I think they like Buddy enough to keep him around, but he's more of a bench piece with this group. Kevon Looney's on a cap hold, but they have bird rights on him, and I would be shocked to see Looney leave at this point. Moses Moody signed a modest extension last October. He's making $11.6 million next year, $12.5 year 2, $13.4 million in year 3. John Hollinger said in a podcast with Nate Duncan around that time that it was a good opportunity for Golden State to create quote-unquote matching salary. And I like that framing, right? Moses Moody would be the most likely candidate to trade if they found an offer that they really liked, or if they thought that turning Moody into a different position, maybe you trade Moody for a power forward if Kuminga doesn't come back. Although alternatively, Draymond and Jimmy Butler are kind of power forwards. But you know what I mean, right? I like having the flexibility of maybe Moses Moody is a long-term piece for us, but that's a good salary slot that we can trade out. They have Brandon Podziemski for another year on a really small deal, $3.7 million. They actually have a team option for him the following year for $5.7. So they're going to have Podziemski for the foreseeable future. Trace Jackson-Davis hasn't had the greatest year, but he's on a non-guaranteed 2.2. That's a pretty easy choice to bring back. Quentin Post has played great for a $2 million salary. He'll be back. But everything really becomes about the Jonathan Kuminga decision. So let's say Golden State has a great playoff. Let's say they split the difference, because I think if they win the championship, it would be pretty difficult to justify letting Kuminga go, especially when you don't have a good means of replacing him. And that's really been the issue for me overall, is when they didn't give him a rookie scale extension in October, and we entered this season and they didn't look great in the winter, I'm thinking, oh, maybe you got to trade Kuminga at the trade deadline, because it doesn't seem like Golden State is going to prioritize re-signing this guy. And with his, 6'7", 6'8", physical profile, his ability to get to the rim, create shot opportunities. No, he's not the most efficient player. He's kind of like if Kyle Kuzma and Jason Tatum were like thrown in the blender and mixed together. He has moments where you're like, wow, like this guy is a force. But then you kind of take a step back and you're like, he's not the biggest or the fastest or the most efficient. He's actually pretty inefficient, and he turns the ball over too much. And this is, if you're Steve Kerr, this is why you get in trouble and you end up pissing him off a lot. Kerr and Kuminga have had a difficult tenure because Kuminga wants to be a starting forward. He wants to be on the floor, but to be honest, he's not the best fit to play with Curry and Draymond. And yet Golden State is stuck with him to the extent that they used a very valuable draft pick to acquire him, and they have not been able to turn him into anybody else, right? Like, dance with the one you know. That's kind of been their philosophy so far. So we'll see. Kuminga's cap hold is $22.9 million, and of course he's going to be a restricted free agent, which means any number of teams could bid on him. I also think that a sign-and trade would be an interesting choice. If you if you sign and trade, if you're the team that is signing and trading away a player, there aren't the same restrictions for acquiring a player via sign and trade. So even though they're so close to the second apron, I'm like 99% sure that they would be okay to do that, particularly if they traded Kuminga for a player that made less in salary. So if you found a team that really loves Kuminga, just talking out loud, if the Brooklyn Nets really, really love Kuminga and they wanted to use cap space on him, I'm like 99% sure that Golden State wouldn't accidentally trigger the second apron, or rather, they wouldn't trigger the first apron if they then moved Kuminga for Cam Johnson, who makes $20.5 million. So if Kuminga was making more, you sign him and trade him to the Nets for Cam Johnson, something like that. I don't know that the Nets would want to do that. In fact, if I'm the Nets, you have enough cap space where, hey, we'll keep Cam Johnson and you just trade us Kuminga. Maybe it's the kind of thing where they could trade Kuminga for multiple players. But nonetheless, I don't want to get too far afield there. I think that this Kuminga decision, it really will come down to, like, how did he look in the playoffs? Was he able to be on the floor with Draymond and Jimmy? And, could the Warriors make the West Finals, make the NBA Finals, win the NBA Finals? So let's say they have a good, not great postseason. Let's say Kuminga was as representative of himself as we know him to be. Maybe he scores 20 or 21 points a game, not the most efficient. Maybe he has a couple boneheaded turnovers. Maybe he has some lapses on defense. The players that Kuminga is looking at for comparisons are a combination of guys who got rookie scale extensions in October or were able to sign, a lucrative deal in RFA. So the first guy that comes to mind for me is Emmanuel Quickley. So just to go over the specifics there quickly, this past July signed a 5-year, $175 million deal in RFA. That was $162.5 million guaranteed, but then there were $12.5 million in incentives. And earlier in the pod, I was talking about unlikely incentives. That's what I'm talking about, right? So they were able to put this additional value in the contract. And if Quickley plays up to that level, then he goes and he gets that money for himself. From the Raptors' point of view, as the salary cap continues to go up 10% every year, they were actually able to flatten Quickley's salary. So they said, hey, we'll give you a $32.5 million salary. That's life-changing money. You're a smaller guard whose, existence in the NBA sort of depends on your ability to move quickly, and we're going to guarantee you life-changing money for the next 5 years. But they flattened the salary. They said, we're not going to give you raises. We're going to start you at a high number, 32.5, and then by the 5th year, when you're making $32.5 million still, that percentage of the cap drops down in an advantageous way for Toronto. So instead of, in the first year, that's 23.12% of the cap, it's only 15.79% of the cap in the 5th year. That's in 2028-29. And for Toronto, you got Scotty Barnes. Now you got Brandon Ingram. Maybe RJ Barrett's on that team. Maybe Jakob Poeltl's on that team. Maybe Grady Dick really grows into something, or Jacoby Walter or Abaji. And so those rookies, maybe they're getting paid a lot more by that time. A really fascinating deal where the player gets things that they wanted and the team does too. Do I think that the Golden State Warriors are going to give Jonathan Kuminga a $32.5 million salary? Absolutely not. And in fact, if you're Kuminga, you bring up Quickley as the example, but you say, actually, you got to pay me more than $32.5 million a year because of inflation. And Golden State's going to laugh Kuminga out of the room. And I don't think the market would reflect that either. I don't think that there's a team that would give Kuminga that much money per year in RFA either. Not based on the teams that have cap space right now. If the Pistons could, I don't know that they would. And the Nets are really the only team that can very easily dig into their pocket and find that money. So quickly, that's a pro player comp. I don't think it's going to be salient. Devin Vassell, alternatively, he signed a rookie scale extension in October of 2023. So he signed this deal before quickly, but during a different transaction period. And notably, he was one of the first players to sign a 5-year rookie scale extension because under the new CBA, now teams can offer a 5th year in the rookie scale extension. It used to be only a 4-year deal. And it would be kind of awkward because if you're the player, you want to lock in guaranteed money as soon as you can. But if you knew that if you just waited a few more months, you could get a 5th year guaranteed instead of just 4, then maybe you're willing to wait, even if that means taking on some injury risk. But in Vassell's case, he didn't have to wait. And so he signed a deal where this past year, he made $29.3 million, just under 21% of the salary cap. And then the salary drops. It drops to 27 in year 2, stays at 27 million in year 3, then drops again in year 4 to 24.65 million. And that's notable because that is the year that Victor Wembanyama will have a new season of a max extension. So Spurs were able to create a little bit of cap relief that year. And then the salary actually goes back up again in year 5 to 27, which is a win for the player because now at age 28, Vassell has an expiring contract and his salary goes back up, which means when he goes into free agency or when he's negotiating an extension with the Spurs, he can say, hey, let's base everything we're talking about on the fact that I was a $27 million player, not a $24.5 million player. So you see? And I mentioned that 140% rule. That is a whole, additional benefit for players. Because now if you're Vassell, and I could actually do this math real quick. I didn't do it ahead of time, so bear with me. If you do 27 times 1.40, that's how you get to 140%. So Vassell could sign a contract extension. The first year salary is $37.8 million. And then he would build that extension off of that amount. So $37.8 million. Then he could do 8% raises from there. So 37.8 times 1.008. That means his second year salary would be $40.824 million. And, you could extrapolate it from there. So let's say Vassell is an incredible, incredible wing shooter, defender, and is a really good fit on this Spurs team with Wemby, with De'Aaron Fox, and with Stephon Castle. I think that the way that the Spurs structured this deal, it's pretty modest. It's pretty modest in the short term. And then in the long run, if things are really working out, they're going to be able to negotiate a new extension for him. And Vassell could very easily play his entire career in San Antonio based on these numbers. But again, do I think that the Golden State Warriors want to guarantee Kuminga $135 million over the next 5 years? It feels very rich. That feels very, very rich based on what we've seen Kuminga do in a Warriors uniform. And again, Vassell signed that deal in October of 2023. If you're Kuminga's representation, you say inflation. You say that contract was signed 2 years ago. We need to update those numbers. And I'm looking, $27 million in the year 2028 is only 13% of the salary cap. If you're Kuminga, you don't want to be stuck on a deal where you're making a fraction of the salary cap that far out into the future. If anything, I think if you're Kuminga, you want to sign a deal with raises. You might even be willing to take a smaller salary in year 1, but you want that deal to have max raises year over year so that by the 5th year, you're actually peaking in salary, and then you can hit the market with the ability to demand more. And so I think the Vassell comp it's way more attractive for the team than it is for Kuminga. My third comparison is Jaden McDaniels, where similarly to Vassell, he signed a 5-year, $131 million extension. This was one of the first 5-year deals that was acceptable after the new CBA in terms of extending off a rookie scale deal. It was 5 years, $131 million guaranteed, but different structure. So the first year salary was only $23 million. By year 5, it steadily increases to $30.4 million. And then interestingly, the percentage of the salary cap is a lot more consistent. So even though the salary rises every year, in real life, the salary cap is jumping up 10% every year. So that first year salary for Minnesota, 16.4% of the cap, but it gradually reduces to that fifth year salary is only 14.8% of the cap. And there were some incentive bonuses in there, including for all defense. We'll see if McDaniels can make the all defense team this year. I think that this contract structure is the closest we've seen yet to what Kuminga could get. If you told me that Golden State offered him something that started around $24 million or $25 million, and then through gradual raises, it turned into something that was in the low 30s by the end, that could make sense to me. Again, I do find it a little hard to believe that Golden State would get that close to the second apron in order to retain Kuminga, unless they really felt like there's no other play. You know, they wouldn't be able to add anyone else of consequence. They didn't like how it looked on the court. Even though letting Kuminga walk, I mean, you basically lose that player for nothing. Unless they can find a creative sign and trade, I think it really could just be, do we want to give this guy $130, $140, $150 million guaranteed over the next 3, 4, 5 years, some variation, or do we let him walk for nothing and risk making the team materially worse at a time where Curry is going to be age 38 next year, Jimmy's going to be age 36, Draymond's going to be age 36. You don't have time to play around. In some ways, winning the championship would clarify everything, because then you just give Kuminga what he wants and you're playing with house money. I mean, if you win the championship this year, there really isn't any downside to being as expensive as you can get away with next year, because Golden State's going to be making so much revenue in the form of ticket sales, sponsorship, and being able basically to sell the championship run and sell the championship pedigree of the team. So these are the things that they got to be thinking about. The one other comp I just wanted to throw out there, Trey Murphy signed with the New Orleans Pelicans last year during the rookie scale extension. So this is October of 2024 he signed. First year salary was $25 million, $27 million in year 2, $29 in year 3, $31 in year 4. So not max raises, incremental $2 million raises each year. The final total, 4 years, $112 million. This is probably the closest comp I could find. I think the Jaden McDaniels one is somewhat close, but because it's a 5-year deal, I think it's just too much money. I don't think Golden State is necessarily looking to sign him for a 5-year deal, although that could be the best way to structure things so that the first year salary is lower. If you're Kuminga, I think you got to be willing to take a smaller first year salary if you can get raises so that in year 4 or year 5, depending on how long he chooses to go, you're making a much bigger salary, and then you can extend off of that, or you hit free agency as someone coming off of a $30+ million deal. So we'll see. I think the Trey Murphy deal, maybe that gets it done. 4 years, 112 would be a decent compromise between both teams, but I've probably gone on a little too long here. So I'm going to wrap up Golden State, and then we're going to wrap up this episode with talking about the Houston Rockets. Last but certainly not least, the Houston Rockets. I'm going to keep this portion of the episode tighter But I'll say right at the beginning, I think that the Houston Rockets might be the biggest player in the 2025 offseason. So much so that maybe I'll do a special episode when we get closer to July, just to talk about all of the possibilities. And why do I say that? Houston could be a cap space team this summer. Per Dunked On Prime, they likely have about $12 million in cap space to start the offseason. That was made possible in large part because they negotiated new contracts with Jalen Green and Alperen Şengün, both of which were sub-max rates. So instead of going into the summer, the specter of negotiations hanging over their head and the possibility that either one of those guys played so well that they demanded a max salary, maybe both guys demanded a max salary. Instead, they have breathing room. I mean, they're totally safe in terms of being able to position themselves away from the tax and other aprons. You know, they didn't make a tax payment last year, so they're not on the repeater clock at all. You know, I think the Rockets pivoting and signing these large deals ahead of restricted free agency for Green and for Şengün, you know, I think it was definitely informed by Donovan Mitchell, Jalen Brunson, Derek White, you know, these other players that they might have been able to trade for or sign in 2025. They all decided to stay with their teams, build with their teams. And so Houston made a great choice, which is we're going to stay younger. We think we can still compete in the short term anyway. And we're going to keep the powder dry. We're going to retain our options for longer. You know, in the NBA, contract extensions lead to more contract extensions. This is because teams have fewer quality free agents to pay. And so they choose to extend their own free agents. They got to use the money for something. And then in turn, players, they have fewer teams to go to. There's fewer teams saving cap room. And so instead of, you know, running the risk of losing a game of musical chairs or being the only pretty girl not asked to dance, they go ahead and sign a contract extension to stay with their teams. And then maybe if they're really itching to leave, they can agitate for a trade like Jimmy Butler did. Although in Jimmy's case, he had to agitate for a trade so that he could get his contract extension. But, you know, that's neither here nor there. But, you know, we're going to talk specifically about the Jalen Green deal in a second. But why don't I just blast through these fundamentals in the 24-25 season? 52-28, second in the Western Conference. Outstanding result. Even if they fell out of the second seed down the stretch, it would have been a great year, but it looks like they're going to hold on, which means they'll play whoever comes out of the play-in round. Based on their advanced metrics, they actually had the expected wins of 56.2, so they're going to finish slightly under that amount. Per Cleaning the Glass, they were 11th in offense, 3rd in defense, 4th in net rating, a plus 6.3 net rating. They've actually been playing better than that down the stretch. 3rd in defense, a 110.2 defensive rating is outstanding for a team this young. And for a team built around Alperen Şengün at center, you know, more of an offensive center, but because of his size and his rebounding prowess, they've actually been able to build really great units. And Amen Thompson, one of the more special young players we have in the league, someone who definitely should get all defensive looks. He and a few of the other guys in this team are so relentless defensively. They turn the other team over. They get out in transition. They're just a real bore to play. Financial fundamentals, 12 contracts under team control, no RFAs, no player options. And then the 3 veteran cap holds they have on the books, they just have a ton of control. About $39 million below the tax. And they have a draft pick as well. They're going to get, I believe, the second best pick between OKC, Clippers, and Houston. So they might end up keeping their own pick in that case. But they're definitely going to have at least one draft pick. Pretty big choice with Fred VanVleet. The team option is for $44.9 million. I would venture a guess that instead of using limited cap space, they will come to a renegotiation with VanVleet. So they'll opt him out, and then they'll use, let's see, Van Vliet has been with the team for 2 years, I want to say. So they don't have full bird rights on him, but they'll be able to sign him for a competitive salary. My guess would be that it would be less than $44.9 million in the first year, but maybe it's a 2, 3, or 4-year deal. I could also see Van Vliet being a sign and trade. If somebody else really wants Van Vliet, they can agree to a number. Houston would be just as well served by signing and trading him away and then getting assets in the exchange. And, for my taste, I would not mind seeing the point guard rotation next year be Amen Thompson, Reed Shepherd, Jalen Green can run the show against second units. I don't really think there's a reason for Van Vliet to play out the rest of his career in Houston. But if that's who they want to be running the show next year, when they absolutely should have some title aspirations, then they have the resources to make that choice. A real conversation here, and what I'll spend a few minutes talking about, is just want to talk about Jalen Green. So Jalen Green was the first player in the current CBA environment to sign a 2+1 as a rookie scale extension. There was never a rule against a player doing that, but just broadly speaking, if a player signs a rookie scale extension, you have until the start of your 4th year to sign that. So that's why you see most of them are signed in October going into their 4th year. And if you think about it, you're only a few months away from free agency. It's restricted free agency, but it's still an opportunity to solicit offers from teams around the league. So if a player is willing to forego restricted free agency and sign an extension, then it must be enough guaranteed money to justify that, right? Just, keeping it super simple. So in most cases, the player who signs the rookie scale extension, they're going to lock in 3 or 4 years. A lot of times what we would see is a 3+1. So a player would sign a 3-year deal and a player option for the 4th year. But then the team might up their offer to say, hey, instead of giving you a player option, we'll give you more money guaranteed, and you basically give that 4th year back to us as team control. And then I mentioned earlier, it wasn't until the 2023 CBA that we saw teams were permitted to offer a 5th year. And right away, Jaden McDaniels, Devin Vassell, we saw players, Jalen Suggs for the Magic, we saw players take that 5th year. Why not? Why not? Especially if it can translate directly to more guaranteed money. Jalen Suggs was able to lock in a $150 million contract over 5 years. Jaden McDaniels, 130. Devin Vassell, 130. That's life-changing money. You'll never have to worry about money again. Generations of your family are set for life. And for the team, it's team control. We know that we have that contract. If we want to trade the player, we will, but otherwise we know who we're building around. For Houston and Jalen Green, ever since they drafted him with the number 2 overall pick, it's been, a kind of precarious situation. Jalen Green has all the talent in the world. I mean, the speed and the power by which he can cross half court, size of dribble, run his man into the screen, burst. Now he's getting below the arc. Now he's getting to the basket. One shimmy move, rise, fire, dunk. This is a guy who has a highlight package already where you're like, man, there can't be 15 better players in the league than this guy, right? This guy must be an all-star every year. Alternatively, he is like an oddly inefficient player, and he's like an oddly inconsistent player. I think it's been back-to-back years that he has seen like a dramatic uptick in points per game in the month of January. And that's funny because it's like he plays his best before the trade deadline. So it's almost like he wants to play so well he's able to focus in and play super well so that Houston is like, man, this guy's a superstar. We can't trade him. Or another team would be like, man, this guy's a superstar. We would have to trade everything for him. And then once the trade deadline passes, his numbers drop again. So let me spell out what Jalen Green did instead. So Jalen Green did not sign a 3 or 4 or 5 year deal. Instead, he signed the first ever 2+1. So that means he's currently in his age 23 season. Okay. Next year, age 24, his salary will be $33.3 million. Not bad. Not bad at all. In 26-27, his salary jumps up to $36 million. Not bad at all. So he was able to guarantee himself about $70 million. Life-changing money. No doubt about it. But then at age 26, in the summer of 2027, he has the choice. It's a $36 million player option, so he could come back for another year in Houston or wherever he's playing if he got traded. He could opt in for $36 million, and then again, he's guaranteed himself $106 million over 3 years. Guaranteed. Life-changing money. Alternatively, he could opt out in the summer of 2027, and he would be a 26-year-old free agent with unrestricted free agency. So to go all the way back, October of 2024, his choice was, I want to sign a contract. I don't really care about being a restricted free agent. I don't think that I've been able to fully establish myself in Houston or in the league. And I want to lock in life-changing money. I want to guarantee myself a huge payday. So he and his representation, they sign these 2 guaranteed years and a third player option, which is also guaranteed, knowing that once you've played beyond 5 years, as a former first-round pick, he was actually the number 2 overall pick. But once you've played beyond 5 years, you're entitled to unrestricted free agency. So I almost brought this up with Kuminga. There is a version of things where Golden State and Kuminga do not work out a new contract, but a 1-year qualifying offer, Golden State has to extend that 1-year offer to him. It'd be about $22 million. And Kuminga could decide, you know what? I'm not going to sign a long-term deal. I'm going to take that 1-year offer, qualifying offer. And then Kuminga would be an unrestricted free agent in the summer of 2026. That actually is a pretty strong possibility. What Jalen Green said, what he decided was, I'm going to guarantee 2 years. And then when I'm 26 years old, I'm going to reset my market. Maybe if I get hurt or something else happens, I'll opt in to the $36 million player option. But most likely, I'll opt out, I'll hit unrestricted free agency, and I will sign the biggest possible deal with whatever team I want. And Jalen Green is uniquely situated to do that because the number 2 overall pick makes a lot of money. He's been able to make about $50 million in his career already. 40 to 50. I'm not looking at the specifics. His salary this past year was 12.5. So he's made good money already. He's now guaranteed himself life-changing money after that. And he set himself up to sign a superstar level free agency deal at the age of 26. I'm going to end the show by going over specifically what that deal might look like. And mind you, I don't think that there is a great chance that Jalen Green gets all this money. And why I say that is because, you look at his numbers like this year, pre-All-Star break, shooting 42% from the field in 33 minutes. He averages 21 points a game, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Post-All-Star break, shooting 43% in about 33 minutes per game, 22 points, 5 rebounds, 4 assists. Very similar numbers. Then, how about this? Let's look at home games versus road games. He's played 40 home, 40 road. At home, His true shooting percentage is only 53.2%, which is mediocre. Again, 21 points, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. On the road, funny enough, he actually shoots better. Has a 56.3% true shooting percentage. It's still not great, but it's a little better. The team is better at home than on the road. And again, 21 points per game, 4 rebounds, 3 assists. Like this is a guy who has not shown night in, night out that he can be a high 20s points per game scorer, right? He's not an all NBA. He is not an all NBA level guard. He's not Devin Booker yet. He's certainly not SGA. That potential, though, is enticing. He's a young man who in theory, has that quick twitch athleticism, that rare gift, where if he can put everything together, he could be an all-star for years to come. So I did the math. A 5-year contract with 8% raises for Jalen Green in the summer of 2027. That's what we're talking about. This is if he opts out of that player option. First year salary would be a base of $42,527,870. That's in the CBA. That's in the CBA based on years of service. Right? He'd have 6 years of service. If he had a 7th year of service, he would be entitled to a larger max. And again, that is another reason why players typically don't do a 2-year deal on a rookie scale. Typically, they do a third because then they're at least a 7th year player when they're a free agent. So Jalen Green did lose some money. He did leave some money on the table in that respect, but I think I largely agree with the strategy here. So $42.6 million in base salary that first year. If we also bake in the maximum 15% unlikely bonuses, which can then create additional contract value for the player, that amount would be $6,379,180.50. That means in the first year of this maximum deal, he would be entitled to $48,907,050.50. We can call that $48.9 million. If you then give him 8% raises and you keep the 15% unlikely bonuses in the contract, year 2 compensation would be $52.3 million. Year 3 would be $55.7 million. Year 4 would be $59.1 million. And the 5th year, when he would only be 31 years old, $62.5 million. And so at the high level, the guaranteed contract value would be about $247 million. That additional contract value from unlikely bonuses would be about $32 million. It's just shy of $32 million, bringing him to a total contract value of $278,557,000. Whoa, baby. And that's on top of the $70 million that he just guaranteed himself for the next 2 years. And he made something like $40 million on his rookie scale deal. This is somebody who would be on track to earn $400, maybe even $500 million in the NBA by the time they retire. And so I applaud Jalen Green for betting on himself. I think this was one of the more fascinating contract decisions we've seen in the NBA in recent years. I think for Houston, you accept those terms and you accept whatever happens. One, because in the short term, it gives them a lot more flexibility. They have a lot of really talented young players that they have to make decisions on. And so by only committing, a sub-max salary to Jalen Green for the next 2 years, and, it's not like he's on the books for 5 years, right? Like, I think, that's one. And then 2, like, they could trade Jalen Green. They could trade Jalen Green starting this summer. So I'm really fascinated what Houston decides to do. Do they look at Jalen Green more so as a trade asset or as a foundational piece? How does that affect the Fred VanVleet decision? How does that affect playing time for Reed Shepherd, Amen Thompson, and some of these other talented guys? Is Dylan Brooks on this team long term? There are fascinating questions for the Houston Rockets, and time will tell. Time will tell. And certainly the Western Conference playoff bracket and how things shake out is going to be as big a driver in these decisions as anything. So I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you for supporting the Collective Basketball Agreements podcast. I'm your host, Joe Manganiello. Let's keep it up, y'all. Basketball on the rise. Basketball all day, every day. Playoffs just around the corner. Thanks for listening. We're going to go to the Golden State Warriors, a team with a lot of good vibes right now. We'll see how bad this gets. We're going to go to the Golden State Warriors, a team with a lot of good vibes right now. We'll see how bad this gets. We're going to go to the Golden State Warriors, a team with a lot of good vibes right now. We'll see how bad this gets.